Well, the first phone call was we picked up the phone, and it wasn't actually Wilbert. It was another person called Julianne Haverth who said, "Are you willing to talk to Wilbert Flinterman?" So we were very curious about who this Wilbert Flinterman was, because not too many people have somebody else call up and ask if you're willing to talk to them.
I was given an assignment. How should we define living wage, and who can we learn from? I looked for people who had already written on the subject. And in looking for an ILO document that could shed some light on the issue, I found two working papers written by Richard Anker, in which he explained his methodology for estimating the value of an adequate diet and some other elements of a living wage methodology. He was the only one, actually, that had written on the topic for the ILO. So then it was a matter of connecting with Martha and Richard.
And then, of course, we talked to Wilbert for quite a long time about living wages without ever having met him. But obviously, we're thinking the same way. We're thinking the same things were very important.
For many years, there weren't that many organizations who really believed in living wage or in using living wage, or that it was feasible to work on living wage. In 1997, when the SA 8000 standard was drafted, we thought it was important. And one of the 9 elements of the SA 8000 standard is that people be paid enough to live on in a regular work week. It was clear then, and maybe still is, that it's not the easiest thing in the world to estimate what the living wage is in different years, different places, different towns.
You could have in a single square mile in a given country 3 different workplaces, all calculating different living wage benchmarks for their operations, which goes against the spirit of the requirement, which is to make sure that workers are receiving a living wage, not that you're meeting the requirement of a standard.
So in the 2010s, we worked with Richard Anker and Tiffany in one of the first projects to estimate a site-specific living wage. And that was successful enough so that people kept it in mind. And then
another colleague who was at SAI at the time that I joined, named Jolene Ong, she found Wilbert Flinterman at Fair Trade International and Biko Nagata, who was at Goodweave, and understood that all 3 organizations had the same challenge when it came to figuring out what to do with living wage requirements.
I was very fortunate to meet Will in Bonn, Germany during an ICL Alliance meeting 12 years ago. And coincidentally, Biko was also visiting Fair Trade that morning, so we shared a taxi to their office. And the initial plan was hatched, the shared vision of if we could just have one methodology that all of these standard-setting organizations can adhere to, we can really minimize this redundant work and efforts and focus on taking action on this work.
Then the pieces of the puzzle came together fairly quickly, because SAI had also been in touch with Richard and Martha on a number of occasions.
We had been in contact with SAI for quite a long time before we met with Fair Trade. So we said, yes, of course, that sounds like a great idea. And then started from there.
Our involvement with the GLWC started back in 2012, 2013, which was really when the standard setting organizations in the ICL membership were thinking about what they needed to do together in order to advance on their living wage ambitions. It was at that point that we were asked to step in to try to mediate some of those early conversations. So we started with that mediation role, and then that just naturally evolved into a host role.
What started with 2 GLWC studies in 2013 has grown into over 200 estimates in over 50 countries.
Anker methodology is based on estimating as the first step the cost of living for a family of a reference size in a particular time and location, which we do using a combination of secondary data, for example, socioeconomic and demographic characteristics, which includes talking to stakeholders who are working in the field. So we have relied extensively on interviews with workers. In fact, just to give you an example, in Madhya Pradesh, we had in-depth interviews with 168 workers. And in addition, we also interviewed key informants like school principals and school authorities, healthcare professionals working in both public and private clinics. We spoke to local contractors, we spoke to NGOs who are working in the region. It is from there that we've got very useful insights. The other thing is that if you look at living wages, based on an assumption that the family has at least one adult in part-time employment, so it takes care of the fact that there is unpaid care work. So I feel that this approach is not just a mechanical way of calculating the cost of living and therefore the living wage. It is very sensitive, at the same time very practical.
The reports that we write are very comprehensive in terms of all the processes that we have followed, the data that we have collected, and how we have used that data to reach a particular value. So by reading those reports is as if you have been there with us doing the research. Some other methodologies are very good for urban areas, for example, but they are not as good in rural areas. So I think that one of the key things of the Anker methodology is that you can do these studies in urban and rural areas, and the results can be comparable.
One of the things I find very powerful and useful is it provides a clear and measurable definition for a very complex reality. It gives us a minimum decent standard, a living standard, in all contexts. It is context specific, at the same time it's comparable. And I like the delicacy it takes between this, what I mentioned, the decency and cost for employer. I like the amount of effort that is put in this because we want both to grow. In a way, we want both the workers and the company to grow and also develop the local economies.
One of the things I like best about the Anker methodology is because it's perhaps the closest to the ILO recommended methodology. It is comprehensive. And you could see in a context of informality in Nigeria, informality of prices, informality of market interactions, the Anker methodology was quite adaptable in that respect.
In terms of conducting this study, it's highly transparent. So with that, then it's established a stronger rapport and buy-in from the stakeholders. It's because they're not only engaged in the process, but they're also able to comment and be able to see the product, the result, the recommendation from the study, as well as they're clear about how the result is being calculated. Then another component which I like is also, this is part of the global initiative. So it's adopted the international standards. Therefore, it allows comparison across countries and which make it acceptable internationally.
SAI and the GLWC members, each of us as organizations work with hundreds or thousands of companies and governments and unions and stakeholders around the world, and this is the unique GLWC multiplier effect.
Fairtrade has implemented the living wage benchmark methodology in its standards. We've used it to apply our standards across the board in the various countries where we have certified plantations. We've used it as the basis for setting the Fairtrade base wage values for banana plantations, and we've used it in our wage costing tools to estimate the value of the living wage differentials.
We incorporate the ARI estimate into our country trends report, where we compare FLA industry average against the GLWC living wage estimate. We have found that using GLWC estimates really helps FLA members understand the living wage gap and help them set target for them to achieve responsible purchasing practices.
GLWC have done a lot and have achieved a lot for the sector. Is that it has really lived true to its original intent and aspiration, keeping the living wage agenda alive and also very much focused.
We have watched the Global Living Wage Coalition's work for many years from the outside, and we have decided to join in 3 years ago to learn from our more experienced peers and to better support our members in the journey towards living wages. I think the best thing about the Global Living Wage Coalition, alongside the Anker Research Institute, is that it provides critical information to enable transparent and inclusive dialogue in supply chain.
We work in over 70 countries. We conduct hundreds of assessments every year, and through each, we seek to promote living wages for workers. I think the best thing is that it's action-driven and fully committed to high quality, consistent data, knowledge, information. And the fact that the reports, the estimates, the methodology, it's all public and freely available.
Wages have always been important to ASC, the wages of workers on fish farms all over the world. And we really do feel that by joining the Global Living Wage Coalition, we're able to map out an approach that's able to apply globally and has a sound methodology and is really just the best way that we can use sort of a science-based methodological approach to help make sure that workers are getting paid what they need to have a good life. This topic is still very new in aquaculture, and we are really still at the beginning of our journey here at ASC. So we've benefited tremendously from direct access to the work that Martha and Richard and the rest of the team at ARI have done, as well as the experience of those members who have been working on living wage and evolving their approach for far longer than we have here at ASC. So we're just really grateful to be a part of the group.
The LWC members reach over 10 million farmers and workers all around the world through their certification standards and other activities.
Here's to the next 10 years of the GLWC. Cheers.
Cheers.
If it weren't for the ILO's early retirement policy, probably none of this would ever have happened.
Maybe it's still going. Are you still recording? I think it's still recording. Sorry. Okay.
Since it's fairly early, so I do have a cup of fair trade coffee.
Some delicious gin or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just imagine it's a nice gin.
Easy recorder, yeah, I've got it. My recording is ready to start. Should I click the red button?